Hi guys, it's Janice. Today we have Mr. Nosy and the Beanstalk. It's quite nice. This one's a little bit shiny, sparkly. Alright, let's get started. Mr. Nosy is one of those people who's curious about everything. If he comes across a parcel, he will start to wonder what's inside it. And the more curious he becomes, the more he has to know. And even if it is addressed to someone else, Mr. Nosy will not be able to stop him from opening it. Just to have a little look at it. This is supposed to be sent to Mr. Happy, but Mr. Nosy here seems to really want to look at what's inside. His curiosity always gets the better of him and gets him into trouble sometimes. One day, Mr. Nosy was out for a walk when he met a wizard. The wizard was holding a small bag. Mr. Nosy, being Mr. Nosy of course, had to know what was inside the bag. The wizard told him that it was a bag full of magic beans. Mr. Nosy had to know what was magical about them. "I'll give you one bean," said the wizard, "and if you take it home and plant it, you will find out. That is, if you're sure that you want to find out." What a silly question! Of course, Mr. Nosy was sure he wanted to find out, being the Mr. Nosy that he is. At home, Mr. Nosy planted the bean in his garden. The next morning, he could not believe his eyes. There in the middle of his garden was a giant beanstalk that stretched up right into the clouds. As Mr. Nosy admired the beanstalk, a thought occurred to him. What could be at the top of the beanstalk? The more he thought this thought, the more curious he became. And the more curious he became, the more he had to know. So he began to climb up the beanstalk. What do you think he's going to find out? He climbed and climbed and climbed and climbed all the way up. And he climbed and climbed right up into the clouds. And when he reached the top, he could not believe his eyes. For the second time that day, that is, there in the clouds was a giant castle. And then a thought occurred to him. Who may live in this castle in the clouds? And the thought grew into curiosity, and the curiosity got the better of him, so he set out across the clouds to the castle. The giant castle had a giant door, and in the giant door there was a giant keyhole. Mr. Nosy cannot pass the keyhole and resist the urge to have a peek. And this time was no different, except that this time it was different because Mr. Nosy could fit right through the keyhole, because it's just so big. Once inside, it quickly became apparent that the who lived inside the castle was a giant. Now, you and I would have sensibly left as fast as we could because we were afraid. In fact, we would not have been there in the first place because it's a bit too dangerous and we probably wouldn't climb up the beanstalk, eh? But Mr. Nosy, as you can guess, could not resist having a look around. So he started walking around. Mr. Nosy went into the giant's kitchen, and in the corner were 3 small cupboards. Of course, Mr. Nosy had to know what was inside them. He opened the first cupboard. Inside was a small bag. Before he could look inside the bag, he heard a terrifying sound. Thump! 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 It was the thud of a giant's heavy-booted footsteps. The giant's coming somewhere in the castle, and they were getting really, really close. Mr. Nosy grabbed the bag, scrambled through the keyhole, and slithered back down the beanstalk as fast as he could. Safely back at home, he discovered that the bag was full of gold coins. All these coins, all this money. That night he could not sleep. He lay in bed thinking about the other 2 cupboards. What could they contain? He really, really wanted to know. Early the next morning, he went back up to the beanstalk and back through the keyhole and back to the second cupboard in the giant's kitchen. Inside was a hen. That's curious, thought Mr. Nosy to himself. Not for the first time in this story, though. He picked up the hen, and there was a golden egg. A hen that lays golden eggs? That mattered Mr. Nosy. I'll need to take this home for a closer look because he always wants to know. Just then, Mr. Nosy heard the heavy boots of the giant coming down the stairs. Thump, thump, thump. Mr. Nosy tucked the hen under his arms and ran for his life, just like the gingerbread man, yeah? The hen fascinated Mr. Nosy, but it did not stop him thinking about the third cupboard. He was terrified of the giant. He was really scared, but his curiosity overcame the fear, and so the following morning, he went back to the giant's kitchen to look for the third cupboard. He opened the third cupboard, and in it was a golden harp, just like a little, a harp sounds like a kind of piano with string, if you could say so. A golden harp that was singing. Wow. Mr. Nosy sat and listened to the harp. He felt really safe, knowing that he would be able to hear the giant's loud boots coming. But the giant was wearing his slippers this morning, which is how he caught Mr. Nosy. So you're the thief! Boomed the giant. I have a mind to grind your bones to make my bread. Mr. Nosy's eyes nearly popped out of his head. But I won't, continued the giant. I prefer cornflakes for breakfast. Now I know what to do with you. Since you're so interested in what's in my cupboards, you can clean them out for me. And Mr. Nosy did. It took him 3 whole days. Giant's cupboards are, well, giant. Now, let that be a lesson to you, said the giant. And you think it would have been. But the very next day, Mr. Nosy came upon an empty house, and the front door was open, and on the kitchen table were 3 bowls of porridge. Wow, that story sounds a bit familiar. Do you remember? 3 bowls of porridge, and you go inside. That's the story. But that's another story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. Do you remember? The 3 bowls of porridge, the 3 chairs, the 3 beds, so on and so forth. Just about right? Alright, so that's the end of today's story, Mr. Nosy and the Beanstalk. I hope you have had a good time. See you next time.